And here we are for another episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. It's Thursday, which surprised me when I woke up, just because I don't tend to pay attention to the days too often. I just kind of get into the flow of things. And isn't it funny how we pick up certain cycles, how we pick up certain rhythms? Like we'll wake up 5 minutes before our alarm once we've set our alarm to that period of time for often enough. And even then we can change the alarm and we'll still adjust for it. And why? Well, because we have kind of an intuitive rhythm that we know. And you could say, well, that has to do with the circadian rhythm and the sun and the how much daylight you get. And I don't know about all that. Because frankly, in my life, I've spent most of my life in the dark, and not metaphorically, though that too. But in terms of just being a night person, I've always been a night person. Daylight, as much as I enjoy daylight, as much as I enjoy summer, I really enjoy periods with less sun. I really enjoy periods of darkness, and it's because it's self-reflective. And so I think that there's more to that. I think that there is more to the rhythm of our life than just the motion of the sun. I think that there are a lot of other motions happening within our life, and I think that we have an intuitive sense of that when we get out of the way. That said, just to take an extreme left turn, I wanted to remind everybody we have a viral video contest right now, which means that you can make a video about Dualistic Unity, of Dualistic Unity, however you want to do it. It could be a montage. I keep saying montage like that's the only idea that's out there, but you can surprise us. Make a video. And if it gets a lot of views, or if it gets more views than any of the other videos, then you can win a free ticket to our California mini retreat, April 11th to April 15th. It's at Big Bear Lake. It's going to be fucking dope. And all you have to do is make a video and put it on social media and tag Dualistic Unity. Let everybody know on the Discord so they can support you. Put the link up there so that way they can go and help like that thing and get it more views and share that, because why not? We're all in this together. Doesn't matter who wins. It's just cool that somebody can win and that we can meet them in person at the California mini retreat. And remember, this doesn't mean that somebody's going to go out there and make millions of views. It's entirely possible that the winning video could have 5,000 views. You don't know. And you can make as many videos as you want to. So there's no cap on it. Go. We have 350 episodes. We just touched that number the other day. 350 episodes, and each episode's like an hour or more. That is a lot of minutes. That's a lot of clips. And I know for my part, I've said a lot of controversial shit. I've said a lot of things that would likely get some attention if you take it out of context. Don't take it out of context. I'm going to stop talking now.
Although out of context, you never know. And then people are a little bit intrigued because with I guess if something's a little too out of context, then maybe there won't be too many people on your side of things. But typically when you post polarizing stuff or even just anything, you never know how people are going to respond to it. And typically when you are willing to be sort of that polarizing voice, it's like there's going to be a lot of people who appreciate that, the willingness, especially in the face of all the attempted restrictions on speech and whatnot, for someone just to be willing to speak freely. A lot of people are going to appreciate that, because it's not just about saying free speech would be a thing. It's like, using that and being willing to talk about what you want to talk about. But that kind of made me think of yesterday after all our group chats, which were a lot of fun, by the way. Shout out our free Zoom we do every Wednesday, our Patreon tier 1 group right after that. I was like, oh yeah, I gotta post about the viral video contest. And so I just started filming, and it was, I guess, probably one of the more authentic videos I've posted, just because it was straight up like, didn't think about anything I said beforehand and started filming before I was ready. And it was a whole sort of interesting experience for me, especially with the thoughts of, curating things in a certain way for social media in order to get, the response that I think is best based on an assumption, based on an assumption, based on an assumption. And so even thinking, you take that far enough with, say, a video, like end goal, even having the end goal, thinking that's what's going to be best, like more listeners to the podcast, the thought of, okay, well, more views on videos, more mentions of it, more things like this, more ways that I can manipulate and control my way to getting what I think is best, which again is just an assumption. Like the depths of that are just an assumption as well. And then there's assumptions on top of that then dictate the ways that we act. So I was kind of realizing, and I play around sometimes with even just podcast clips. Like I'll throw a little bit of an intro in there or something, but sometimes it's hard for me to just post one and just like mention the episode instead of trying to, do something that like hooks people in a little bit more or something like that. But looking at that, and I took a good honest look at that yesterday, like kind of like I was saying a few days ago with contorting my messages in a way that then you know, helped videos go viral and whatnot, thinking that that was the best thing. And it's not to say that it wasn't the best thing, but there's this assumption that there's certain things that we do that are what's best, and so anything that can get you there is the best thing to do in the moment. But it was very freeing because I was going through just doing some clips yesterday, and I posted I played with one of them, did a little bit of an intro, and it did end up getting more views than the other ones. But even looking at that, like what kind of views, like what are you actually expressing there that you, and not to say that you're specifically expressing anything, but it's not just about how it's looked at or getting the most amount of views. It's the mentality that you're getting across, the ability to do that without so much manipulation and control. And so you see, a lot of people out there just controlling messages in the way that they think is best. So posting the one I did about the viral video contest, I was like, I kind of think that one's pretty funny. Like I kind of enjoy that I start off forgetting what I'm going to say completely and then kind of laughing my way through it and then realize like, all right, I probably should have done a second take just because there were details that I then had to include in text and whatnot. But it was just something that I wasn't thinking about how it was making an assumption about how it was going to be received. And there can be an appreciation because I could imagine someone else I know posting a video like that. And it's like, oh, yeah, I appreciate that kind of lack of concern being expressed because you're always just expressing your state of relaxation in a sense. And like we're trying to get there via all of these ways. But you can also do it because it's not a thing that you get to. There's not a way you can control your way to relaxation. It's like you do it now or you don't. And so anyway, it was just hitting me like the manipulation, the desire to control things is just based on so many goddamn assumptions on top of what I think is best. And you don't know. Like you don't know. So posting, clips without any context or whatever could, someone could get there. And it's like, it's not even about fucking getting someone anywhere, like to the podcast. Even I've always said that's my main goal with social media is all my videos, just get people to the podcast. But I'm realizing how much even that is getting in the way of just being myself.
Pretty much. I mean, that's the whole thing. Is be yourself. And then when people are like, "Hey, I want to know more," go check out the podcast. Right. But that's it. Podcast is secondary and it should be for everybody, including our listeners. Every single person in the podcast should be secondary to your existence, to your life. Whatever happens here should be a result of the work that you're doing. Otherwise, and it's important that that be the case. Like what I like about the podcast is that we don't try to be anything. And so we're just being ourselves. And I come across to a lot of people as just kind of arrogant and abrasive. And so they don't make it for long through the podcast for that. And people have asked me like, well, why do you come across that way? And I guess it could be a number of things, just all of the influences of my life, the way that I've more or less learned to be as a person. But the real question is, why do you need me to be something else? Why should it be easy for you to have this conversation? It's not easy for me to have this conversation with myself by any means. And so if it's worth anything, then you'll tolerate my otherwise harmless dickishness. Right. And that's kind of the point. But it took me forever to come to that point. It took me forever to understand that I don't need to be anything because I'm only partially responsible for this exchange. I I'm not in any like I'm aware of the impact that I make. And so I act from this place where it's like, I wouldn't like it if I did that. But because I have such an appreciation for the people in my life, in my story, over time, who have told me shit I didn't like, who have taken the brunt of being the bad guy in my perception, and it's helped me to grow as a person. It becomes more and more questionable if it's not more valuable to occasionally be a prick. If our idea of love and compassion is a little bit too simplistic and too superficial. So, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is be yourself. Like for me, the podcast is just it just exists, and I'm incredibly grateful that it does. But that's what it is. It just exists. I'm still doing stuff in the world. I'm still parenting. I'm still growing myself as a person. I still release TikTok videos that I find interesting and helpful, and so on and so forth for people who are going through shit that I've gone through. Because that's the basis of my empathy is however much suffering I can relate to in myself, recognizing myself, appreciating myself and my own existence, the more I can recognize what we're going through, what everybody else is going through as well, right? Or at least the generalities of it. We're all uncertain as fuck, and it's scary, right? And with that urge to control the fear and to get away from the suffering comes more suffering and conflict. So that's pretty universal for all of us. But that's more or less it. I just went on a long ass rant there. It's Thursday. I'm high. It's going to happen. I'm looking forward to our episode of being high later on.
Yeah, likewise, same boat. And yeah, it's funny how yep, hold on. Just with how deep that runs with it's not yeah. So because like if you're talking with someone and again, it just comes back to you with yourself, but thinking that something is, you know, a controlling mechanism to think that that's what's best. Like you take that far enough, you go a couple steps into it, and it typically they start to fall apart because of uncertainty, because you don't know. And like there's resistance to that. There can be a lot of resistance to just not knowing and just being willing to like let go, obviously, because but we'll make those assumptions that then come in all sorts of way, shapes, and forms about reality and myself and experience and all of these things and ways that I think that and especially with like doing a podcast or doing a retreat, like even just subtle ideas of the right way to do it. It's so interesting, like not having that, like this not being anything but just an expression. And people talk about authenticity all the time, but that's like the depths of that is not looking around, like not checking, not looking to structures or checking in even with I don't know, and like with a 9 to 5 job or something, like my last job, digital advertising, there was there's a like a balance with that, I think, but there's like degrees of structures given the structure that you're buying into. But without that, like with this is very much not like there's nothing that we have to look to by any means because like we don't have someone looking over our shoulder. We don't have someone saying like, "Hey, no, do this, meet this." This is just us here. Like shifting, changing as we go, talking about stuff as we go, doing things as we go. And so we don't have, like, there's always the opportunity to look to structures or look to a right way, but it's never that necessary. And that's where changes and shifts really happen, is when you're not looking around so much, looking for the right thing. And it's just, oh man, it's just been hitting me how often we'll look around. I'll look around. People will look around looking for a right way. And it's because otherwise you're just alone, and it's like having faith in yourself. But it's not even like faith in yourself. It's just there isn't so much left to focus on separate from just doing what you're doing, being what you're being, moving through, interacting, just without so many, not that there aren't considerations, but like to a point without so many of those moment to moment concerned considerations. It's like looking at yourself always, and that informs you, but it's like a informative here, not informative from looking around, like trying to gain all of this knowledge and understanding, like fucking knowledge, man. Like knowledge is here. That's the only spot. If you're acquiring knowledge, it's almost taking it further, very much so, from, or at least getting in the way of the reality of knowledge, like the illusion of having knowledge, maintaining knowledge. I have knowledge of this. Like, who? What is that? Oh man. Yeah. Anyway.
But it's funny, right? Because we tend to disregard the simple fact that everything that we do, our endeavors, our goals, our projects, they're all impacted by our state of mind. All of it. And we tend to disregard that. And we just look at industry. We just look at, the building of the economy. But at one point, I'll give you an example. The pharaohs of old didn't hesitate to just grind somebody in between the giant blocks of whatever they were building. What's that? The slave didn't get out of the way. Oh well. Like thousands of people died in building these giant monuments. It's pretty obvious there that there's a problem with the pharaoh's mental state, in that he's detached and full of himself and totally lacking empathy. Right? Well, what's the difference between that and somebody like Jeff Bezos getting everything that he wants, paying a city to rebuild their port for his mega yacht, doing all that while his workers are working so hard that some of them are barely able to make it to the bathroom just because they have to keep working as hard as they do, and they don't get paid very well, right? You don't think that's impacting their health? That all of the stress of having to live in poverty isn't impacting their health and contributing to the deterioration of that health and their mental health over the long term? Like, it's obvious that there is a problem with the mental health of somebody who can hoard billions of dollars and not recognize that other people barely get by. And so that's just one example, but the same could be true for anything. If you were to build a building, and let's say you were to build a small house, and the four people that are building that house or endeavoring to build that house together are all just distracted as shit by their personal problems, by jealousy for each other, by envy for each other, by competition, by all of this stuff, self-judgment, loathing. That house probably isn't going to get together very well or very quickly. Right. And if it does go up, it's probably there's going to be a lot of cut corners for some petty reason or another. And then they're going to blame the other person. And do you see what I'm saying? Like, mental health, our state of mind impacts everything that we do. And yet when we look at our economy, when we look at our government, we look at all that, we just look at, the various different laws. We're not looking at the state of mind that's contributing to those laws. The state of mind that's contributing to the system. We forget how impactful our state of mind is on everything that we do. This is what Krishnamurti was trying to say when he was talking about the fact that we don't really know what it is to work together, because so often we get together for a project, but everybody is paid to be there and working for their own ambitions. They're working for their own selfish needs or wants, as opposed to a collective, this is what we're going to do, right? For the same reasons, with the same outcome. It's rare that we know how to work together. And it's because we're so invested in ourselves. I thought that was a great point.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of with the Nash equilibrium to some degree with from A Beautiful Mind. Shout out that movie we did a review on. That'll be out at one day, but great movie. Definitely watch that beforehand. But it's that like, oh my gosh, how infrequently we look at the mentality behind decision making, like the mentality behind it. And then you look at, a billionaire, and if you ask someone who's like doesn't see the destruction in even just someone having that much to themselves, like you start to ask, okay, is that actually like, are they actually free, relaxed, happy? Like, is that not it? And there's just kind of this ignoring of that. How many people go to that point and they're still super stressed, rigid, not relaxed, and we see it over and over and over, and yet just to have an answer to like the best thing to do, it's just to be able to look to something, we'll look to that, making as much money as possible without very much consideration for like our experience moment to moment. And the excuses that we'll come up with for the reasons to, be able to do something like that and not recognize it. Like, oh man. Yeah, like I've heard a bunch throughout my life that when as soon as you start asking a couple questions like, "Oh, well, what's the alternative?" You know, whoa, what you saying that they worked for that, they earned that, and it's like, that could be entirely correct. I'm not saying that you're wrong that they didn't do things to make money and build a business, whatever, but right, yeah, like absurd amount of money, and still, but regardless, even if you separate from that, it's still what is it doing? Like, what is it actually doing for them? And yeah, it's like getting them as close to control as they can, but without any willingness to look around at the rest of themselves. And so it of course it all comes from our mentality, like all of that. And so it can't, like we were talking about the other day with structures, like it can't be a different structure: communism, socialism, capitalism, all the other isms out there. Like it it can't be that, because it's if it stems from the same mentality, it's just going to go through the same cycle. And yet at the same time, I'm saying like can and can't, whatever, as if there's like, I know, and it's, yeah, because, and again, we're just talking, but it's right in our faces. Like it's right in front of us. And we still are able to not look at it just because we're so focused on ourselves. Like when we're focused on ourselves, we can't see very far beyond ourselves. Like we can see a little bit, maybe, but not much. Like people close to us who, in the same sort of situations, whatever, same community, whatever, like, but then it's like the extent to which you can recognize seeing yourself, you know, without that. But as long as you're maintaining some sort of story about yourself, that's going to take up a lot of the focus, and it's going to drive a lot of the decisions without almost any consideration for the repercussions whatsoever.
Yeah. And it's it's gross. Like when you look at just the complete lack of understanding or even just willingness. So give you an example. An annual salary, there you go, that's better. Face is working again. Awesome. Of $100,000 is like a dream come true. 100,000 US dollars is like a dream come true to anyone making less than 50K a year. All of a sudden it's like twice as much time, twice as much resource. It changes everything. Changes everything. When all of a sudden you're planning vacations and shit, you're like, I'm gonna take some fucking time off. Oh, this is awesome. Maybe I'll invest. Everything changes rather than just fuck. How am I gonna make rent? Oh, I'm gonna have to look for those sales. I'm gonna check out the coupons. I'm gonna fucking make sure I'm taking advantage of Black Friday. I'm doing all that. I mean, almost like a desperate need. So 100,000 US dollars a year is life changing for a person or a family. Jeff Bezos makes 14 of those salaries every hour. Every hour, Jeff Bezos makes $100,000 salary 14 times over every single hour. Now, to look at that and not think that somehow that could make a difference is just the epitome of selfish ignorance. It really is just being lost in your own shit to the point of being completely disconnected from anyone. It's sad.
Because then, you hear something like that. And like, I've had conversations like this with people in the past, and so I hear responses to it and things like that. Kind of like, well, maybe it's just the Elon Musk response to, the world hunger thing. It's like, show me how it would make that big of a difference. And it's like that all or nothing sort of thing because of the mentality, because if it's not all of it, then I can't fucking put that up on my wall or put that up like cured world hunger. Like if someone could show Elon that, he might do it. If it could be definitely cure world hunger, period, I do it. Like there's a good chance. But without that, it's like, whoa, no, because me. And it's like, yeah, but this so much. There's so much because that's the shift in mentality. Is that the recognition? Bezos, Musk, anyone, and you know, they're just the most obvious answers because it's like there's not even a fleeting thought or need for anything, and it's increasing by the second. So they can't even. It's like they probably can't even spend the money they're making fast enough to do it. And like, oh my god, and the impact that could have, but without the ability to see that, like without the shift in mentality, it's like it doesn't make sense. But then as we've talked about before, like that's some serious ability to influence your own environment. Like we discount the ability to everything that we do. It's like we are our environment, but from perspective of me here, it's like I'm interacting with my environment, but I have influence over it. And we're shifting it all the time. But like we do have sway on our environment. And then that shifts the landscape of what's going on around us. Cause we're not, as much as we're alone, like we're interacting with a bunch of ourselves all the time. And so, if you're a little bit more relaxed, free in yourself, that's going to have so much influence on everything going on. And as you do that, certain desires and being looked at in a certain way or being having fucking $100 billion or whatever doesn't make any sense whatsoever anymore. Like it makes zero sense to maintain that unless you are deriving some sense of value from that you're not able to see right now. It's like an extreme of insecurity. Because if that insecurity wasn't there, there wouldn't be so much need to hold on to this is the number that I have. Kind of like we saw in time this past week, just like looking at the number, thinking that that means something. But then again, it's like the rush towards ultimate control, thinking that you can get ultimate control if you have all of it. And without that, then that may chip away at your ability to have ultimate control, which is like, yeah. So it does just come back to our mentality so many ways.
Always. And again, the perception of division. Because the more you're focused on the fiction of yourself, the less you can feel connected to everything else. This is why often people who hoard money like that make me very sad, because that's a very lonely place to be. You know, Donald Trump is a perfect example of that. You know, this is a man who is feeling very alone, needs everybody to agree with him, and if they don't, then it tears him down. You know, and there's a great deal. You can see a lot on his face when he's not putting on the show, I guess, is what I'm saying. But it's a very lonely place to be. But if you were to think of it, like a lot of people often say that money is energy and it's just energy transferring around. Okay, well, could you imagine if one single part of your body suddenly just kept all the water? The rest of your body'd be fucked. And that's exactly what we're doing in terms of billionaires. And it's not that they should be forced to give up their money. It's how the fuck did we get into a place where a mentality like that goes unchecked until it has amassed that much influence and yet has no self-awareness? Like, the problem is way bigger than billionaires. It's just we'd like it to be about the rich, but it's about the fact that we have a mentality that keeps creating the imbalance between rich and poor. Because most of us want to be rich. Not most of us want everyone to thrive. Most of us want to be rich.
Yeah. And so it shifts with every one of us just becoming more relaxed in ourselves. Because as we've talked about before, like a lot of that stuff doesn't make as much sense. It makes sense when you're tense and rigid and stressed and thinking there's a way to alleviate that you can just get to, as opposed to, sitting with yourself. And as you sit with yourself, and that's why, there's a lot of to someone who is, and, I see this with people, like with friends who maybe used to smoke a little more weed and they don't as much anymore. It very much goes hand in hand with trying to become something. Because when you're sitting with yourself, when you're a little bit high, a little bit more relaxed, those things don't make as much sense. And so, in order to maintain those things making sense and being able to hold on to that, you know, idea of control and getting to a point in which you're, you know, in which you're good, in which you can relax, you got to stay away from relaxation right now, because that might get in the way of that illusion of getting somewhere else, or the focus on impressing other people in some way, shape, or form. But without that, like if everyone, I'm not saying put mushrooms or cannabis in the water, but if there was an ability to do that, like, or at least a little bit of it here and there, or it was, some requirement going into adulthood, or politicians, or CEOs, or whatever, it has a way of kind of balancing things out. And we've stayed away from those types of substances that don't do anything for you. They just open up the door to that state of relaxation. They're just things like any other substance, like any other thing that we do, like any other action or whatever. They're all variations of influences, but those are some that very much are on the side of a more relaxed, okay with yourself mentality, being willing to be chilling right now, as opposed to constantly striving and getting somewhere. So it's just fascinating how you see when you start to see things as more symbolism, like those substances being made illegal, like it just doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever. Like in a certain mentality trying to be maintained, it does in order to maintain the mentality itself, just as a self-sustaining sort of thing. It's like, oh, this getting in the way of this sort of mentality. We gotta push that away. Oh, we can't. Let's just make it illegal for everyone. It's like, oh man, because it, and then you have to build stigmas around it. And I've said before, like the only reason you need a stigma for a substance is because it's the only way to say that it's bad. Because like all the data, all the research, or with weed, it's like we got to do more research on it. Well, we can't do more research on it because it's illegal. And there was that cycle for a while. Same with psychedelics that we're kind of going through right now. But it's just this sort of passive aversion, and everyone's so distracted and focused on themselves that we don't really see the absurdity in a lot of things until we're even just like a little bit out of our own way, a little bit more relaxed. We can start looking around, scratching our head and being like, that makes like not even a little bit of sense. It's not even like there's anything there that you can point to. It's just it doesn't make any sense. But unless we're willing to look at it ourselves, then we'll just make assumptions or look to someone else. Oh, they say it's bad, so it must be bad. Oh, they say it does this. Like, oh, and then there's not even the willingness to try it. And so you stay away from it. But then, that was like first time I tried mushrooms. I was like, what the fuck? This is what's illegal? Like, this is what we're making illegal. So anyway, but yeah, in the maintenance of a mentality, certain things have to be suppressed.
Well, that's just it. It's just like maintaining a certain level of stress in your body requires you to avoid certain things that relax you, right? But this is not to say that these substances on their own are going to do anything for us collectively. I mean, it really just comes down to the work, which anybody who knows the experience of psychedelics knows that there is always a certain degree of trepidation before you go into an experience. That is part of the work, in fact. And even without psychedelics, you are always faced with the reality of uncertainty. You're with the temptation to reach for control, to reach for identity, to reach for thought. You're always faced with that. And so it's always the same work. And if we're doing that individually, it's not about other people, it's about ourselves, then that's the best thing that we can do. We're doing that collectively. That's more or less it, because it changes how you impact everything. It changes how you impact everyone. So regardless, and we had this question in yesterday's group from somebody. It's like, what do you think the difference between mushrooms and LSD is? It's like, well, there are differences, or there are differences in every psychedelic. The question is, are you escaping reality, or are you trying to learn something about your response to reality? Because then the psychedelics are irrelevant. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You could be having a beer and you'll still be facing the same lesson, still learning the same lesson about your relationship with yourself. So this is why it's important to remember. It's just like the body, right? The body will heal itself if you let it and you get out of its way and stop interfering, stop picking at it, as it were. But that doesn't mean it doesn't help to have medicines that help the body relax into the healing process, right? They're both useful. But the most useful thing you can do is just stop getting in the body's way to begin with.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Even with that, like, even with sickness or fighting or whatever, there's so many things that again, it's like mentality of control, trying to thinking that I'm going to be able to do something better than what's already going on or already happening. And so we'll have all like the amount of pharmaceutical drugs out there is crazy. Like you couldn't even trying to think of ones that I've heard about. It's like and they have the most like I'm actually kind of curious now, like where the fuck do those crazy ass names come from? Is that just like there's so many that they started having to use different letters of the alphabet in different ways, or was it just needing to make up so many different goddamn terms. And I guess we see that reflected too in the disorders and the what is it, the DSM-5, like continuing to come up with more and more disorders on like an exponential rate each year. There's just more and more and more. 19,000 prescription drug products approved for marketing in the USA alone. Jesus fucking Christ, that was even more than I was thinking, like 3,000 maybe. 19,000. And I guess a lot of that is just people jumping on, bandwagons of certain things and then being able to run with marketing, like ibuprofen and Advil, that sort of deal. It's like a number of things. And so, oh man, because with patents and all of that, like, yeah, they're
Remember,
able.
though, that's prescription pharmaceuticals.
Oh, that's
This
just
does not
prescription?
include things that's
Mm.
prescription pharmaceuticals. This does not include things like Tylenol and Advil.
Holy fuck. So it could be like fucking 50,000 with all that shit. Like, that's 19,000 is just prescription drugs. Holy shit. Like, and how often? Because and that's something I've kind of, I don't know, maybe I can thank my parents for not doing too much, thinking they'd have to take too many pharmaceuticals or whatever. But like, I grew up always kind of thinking I could do it myself with stuff. Like if I was feeling a certain way, I mentioned this last week. Like I was, I said like addicted, but not actually addicted, just to figuring out when there was, certain stuff I was going through, or feelings, or like a injury on my body, like figuring it out as quick as I could. And so I had I didn't want the doctor giving me some thing if I was there. Like I didn't like taking medicines very often. And I mean, especially now, like I used to take, if something like headache, whatever, would take some Advil or something. And I'm lucky I haven't really had to deal with too many brutal headaches in my life, but I don't, even when I do now, it's more so look at, where's that coming from? It's coming from something, am I a little bit dehydrated? Have I been, am I tired? Whatever. It's like, look at that instead of, oh, this thing's happening to me. I got to figure out how to deal with it. It's like, no, this is coming from me, but with the assumption that things are happening outside of us, there's the need then for external sources for those things, like drugs, like validation, like anything, as opposed to taking the responsibility and realizing that, oh no, this is coming from me somehow. And if I just am willing to sit through it, like, yeah, you learn a lot. You can learn a lot about yourself or whatever you're going through. And then maybe it stops coming up so much. Those things, whatever it is. But we're so quick to be like, I gotta get the drug. Give me drug. Give me drug. Like pharmaceutical. And so there leads to there being fucking 19,000 prescription drugs. That's unreal.
Well, and remember that 30% of those, 35% of those are opioid pain relieving drugs. They're meant to be drugs that relieve pain. And so this is where you can see how the cannabis industry is a huge threat, because that's what people will typically replace. They'll get off opioid based medications and replace it with cannabis use instead. And it's because it works just as well with way less side effect, except in cases of extreme pain. But even then, it depends on what you're doing with the cannabis. But the point is that it's a very good way to regulate pain, as well as to help with other health problems and mental health problems. All right, so you can see why the pharmaceutical industry is pissed and worried, and all of a sudden why we're having so much more focus on vaccines, which specifically come from the pharmaceutical industry. We're going to end this here. It's the end of our episode. This has been a lot of fun. We're going to continue on. It's a tier 2 call on Patreon today. If you are not a Patreon supporter, please consider being a Patreon supporter. We have a 7-day free trial, so you can join and find out why you should be a Patreon supporter. We really appreciate your time here, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Talk to you soon.